In this world, individuals can gain extraordinary abilities by consuming the fruit of the skill tree. With a bit of luck, you might end up as a firebender or even a sword saint. However, for Light, his fate was quite different. He ended up as nothing more than a nutting master. On the day when skills were to be bestowed, Light and his childhood friend Lena were on their way to the church to undergo the ceremony. The two chatted excitedly about the skills they dreamed of acquiring. Light had always aspired to be an adventurer, so he would be thrilled with any skill that was combat-oriented. Lena, on the other hand, wasn't too concerned about what skill she might receive, as long as it meant she could stay by Light's side. Still, she was a bit nervous since no one really knows what kind of skill they'll get until they eat the fruit, but Light was sure they would both get amazing skills. However, we already know how that turned out for him. When he and Lena went into the church that day, the Holy Sister told them all about how the skill fruits work. You're granted a skill once you eat the fruit, and it will guarantee you a job in any related field of your choice, all without any crippling student loan debt. They were given the opportunity to choose any one of these fruits to gain their skill. But there was one unbreakable rule: you could only consume one skill fruit in your entire life. Attempting to eat a second fruit would result in poisoning. Many had lost their lives because they were dissatisfied with their skill and decided to take a second fruit. The Holy Sister emphasized this point, making it absolutely clear that eating more than one fruit carried a 100% fatality rate. Lena was taken aback by how dangerous the fruits could be, but the Holy Sister reassured her that as long as she refrained from eating a second fruit, there was no cause for concern. With the warnings out of the way, the Holy Sister told them to begin selecting their fruit. Lena stepped up first. She took a bite out of one of the fruits, and she immediately felt something happening to her body. There was a blinding light, and Lena's body suddenly became very hot. The Holy Sister realized this must be the legendary Sword Saint skill. It was incredibly rare, so she never thought she would get to see someone acquire it in person. But now that Lena was officially a Sword Saint, she was destined to become one of the greatest adventurers in the country. Light was genuinely thrilled for Lena and congratulated her on obtaining such an incredible skill. But now, it was his turn. He approached the altar and carefully selected a skill fruit for himself. While he didn't expect to gain something as extraordinary as the Sword Saint skill, he still hoped for a decent combat skill that would allow him to stand alongside Lena in battle. However, as he took a bite and felt the skill flow into his body, his heart sank. It turned out he was just a nut master. The Holy Sister did her best to offer some encouragement, but it was clear that the only battles Light would be facing were against pests out in the fields. Light was devastated that his dreams of being an adventurer had been ruined, so he asked if he could try again. But the sister was very clear about the 100% fatality rate, so she wouldn't let him eat another fruit. Lena tried to cheer Light up and told him she would stay in the village and grow fruits with him since she didn't care what she did as long as they were together. But the Holy Sister wouldn't stand for all this love and compassion BS. Lena's Sword Saint skill was a once-in-a-decade marvel, so she wasn't going to let her waste that talent by becoming a farmer. She demanded that Lena become an adventurer for the sake of the country, and in fact, she would be taking her to the royal capital immediately so she could begin her training there. Lena couldn't find the courage to defy the Holy Sister's demands, so she was taken away. However, she made a heartfelt promise to return for Light one day. 3 months had gone by since that life-changing day, and Light was doing his best to embrace his new reality by focusing on his role as a farmer. Using his powers, he ensured the nuts grew large and healthy, and once they were ripe, he sold them in town to earn a profit. Life wasn't terrible for him, as long as he kept those nagging thoughts buried deep in the back of his mind. One day, he headed into town to sell his nuts, but since his nuts were so small, he got paid very little for them. As he was walking back to his house, he noticed a poster with some news about Lena. She had apparently been promoted to S rank in the 3 months since she left the village and was doing incredibly well for herself. Of course, he was happy for her, but thinking about how well she was doing just made him feel like an absolute failure, even though he knew he didn't have the skill to become an adventurer. Light had been training every day in hopes that he might naturally unlock a sword skill or something. He swung his sword at a tree stump over and over, convinced that if he could manage to split it in half, he could prove himself strong enough to become an adventurer through his own effort. But hard work doesn't always yield results, and all he gained from his relentless training were a pair of bruised wrists. Collapsing to the ground in defeat, he began to wonder if Lena still remembered him. She had promised to return, but with all the fame and fortune she must have achieved, he wouldn't be surprised if she had completely forgotten both his name and his face. Just then, a little girl named Isla walked up to Light and said she brought him a cup of water. She was pretty much an orphan, and the village chief didn't want to deal with her, so he kind of just left her on Light's doorstep one day. Light saw that she had nowhere to go, so he decided to take her in, and the two had been living together ever since. Isla told him she was done with dinner, so if he wanted to, he could come inside to eat, and Light happily obliged. He took his first bite of the food, and while he ate, Isla asked him how today's harvest went. All in all, Light remarked that today's profits were quite decent, especially now that he had started focusing on cultivating skill fruits. He made a point to mention that he had carefully sorted all the skill fruits into boxes clearly marked with skull emojis, emphasizing that Isla absolutely must not eat any of them. Isla, however, hadn't been aware of the dangers associated with consuming skill fruits, so Light's warning was definitely helpful, or at least it would have been an hour earlier, as she had already used several of those fruits to prepare the stew they were currently eating. Light got up in a panic and asked if she was sure she put skill fruits in the stew, but she definitely did, and from what the Holy Sister said, eating a second skill fruit was a guaranteed death sentence. All of a sudden, Light's body began to feel hot. He felt a pain in his chest, so he believed this was how he would die. He fell to the floor, and in his final breath, he apologized to Isla because this was his fault for expecting her to understand the labels when she didn't know how to read yet. As he lay on the ground waiting for death to claim him, Light noticed that it was taking far longer than expected. Sitting up, he was stunned to find himself completely unharmed. Isla noticed the bewildered look on Light's face and asked if he was okay. That was precisely the source of his confusion. Consuming a second skill fruit was supposed to be fatal, so how was he still alive? Just then, a sharp headache struck him, accompanied by the surge of a new skill's power flowing through his body. Isla started to feel a sharp pain in her body as well, and since she ate the stew, that must mean she was about to acquire a skill too. All of a sudden, she was able to see words floating in front of Light and read out the info of his Nut Master skill. In addition to the ability to grow nuts, Light's skill also made him immune to all nut poisons. Light is taken aback and questions Isla about how she knows this. She explains that she can see words floating in the air, and Light quickly deduces that she must have gained some kind of appraisal skill. Isla continues reading through Light's information and discovers that he now has a second skill. She informs him that the new ability is called Sword God. The Sword God skill significantly boosts Light's attack power whenever he wields a sword and also provides a substantial increase to his magic resistance. If what Isla says is true, this could mean that Light's dream might finally become a reality. Light wants to test it out for himself. He runs outside with his sword and goes back into the forest to see if he really has a new sword skill. He raises his sword, and with a single swing, he slashes the tree stump in half, as well as the bigger tree behind it. It's safe to say that, as of this moment, Light is overpowered. The following day, Light heads into town with the goal of visiting the guild and finally becoming an adventurer. He's brimming with excitement, as this has always been a dream of his. The first thing that catches his eye is the notice board filled with bounty quests. If they can successfully complete one, they'll have enough money to buy better equipment and delicious food. However, earning money isn't the only reason Light came here today. He's determined to test just how effective his Sword God skill will be in combat. If things go well, he might finally achieve his goal of becoming an official adventurer. He tells Isla to sit on a bench and wait for him while he gets a quest at the front desk. While he's gone, Isla takes the opportunity to use her appraisal skill on all the people in the guild. She's amazed by all the different types of skills that exist, but she's also shocked by how useless some of them are, like this guy who has a self-damaging skill. At that moment, Isla hears a commotion coming from the front desk. When she looks over, she sees Light caught up in a heated argument with one of the adventurers in the guild. the man recognizes Light as the guy who's always selling nuts in the market and mocks him, declaring that someone like him doesn't belong in the guild. Light, however, pays him no attention and simply turns to Isla, saying they can leave now. The guy is offended that Light would dare to ignore him, so his completely normal reaction is to attack Light with his sword. Light's sword god skill also improves his reflexes, so he is easily able to block the attack. The guy had no idea Light could do that, so he fully intended to catch a murder charge today. The guy's friends see that Light is capable of defending himself, so they convince him to just walk away because this isn't a fight he can win. Jean tries to play off his outburst and claims he never really intended to hurt Light, so he and his friends leave the guild to go on their first mission. Shortly after, Light and Isla leave as well since Light has gotten the quest for them. They make their way to the rocky plains, and Light is filled with excitement at the thought of finally encountering a monster in real life. Knowing how dangerous the area is, he warns Isla to stay close to him. Before long, they spot their target, a slime monster in the distance, and Light readies himself for battle. He moves cautiously, trying to sneak up on it, but the slime notices him regardless. Switching tactics, Light opts for a direct frontal attack. With his newfound strength, he charges at the slime, slicing it cleanly in half and unintentionally splitting the ground beneath it in the process. He's happy that his skill really is useful in battle, but he knows he's going to have to work on his power management so he doesn't cause any more collateral damage. Isla congratulates Light on his first successful quest. They need to cut the slime up and bring the parts back to the guild so they can exchange it for money. Isla says she feels kind of bad about cutting the slime's body up, but Light reminds her that they'll earn enough money for pizza if they sell the slime parts. Isla throws her morals out the window and begins dissecting the slime. At that moment, they hear shouting coming from the other side of the plains. Rushing over, they find Jean and his party under attack by a massive ogre. The group had deliberately chosen an easy quest, planning to kill a slime and head home, but they never anticipated encountering an ogre. The orc swings its weapon at them, forcing everyone to leap out of the way. Even though they manage to avoid the initial strike, it's clear they have no chance of defeating such a formidable opponent. Light calls over to them to ask if they are all right, and as soon as Jean spots him, he comes up with a plan to escape. He and his friends start running straight at Light. Light is a bit confused by what they are doing, but then they run past him, and he realizes they are trying to use him as bait so they can flee. The ogre now intends to attack Light, so he has no choice but to fight it. In fact, this works out well for him since he needs to test the limits of his new skill. The ogre swings its mace toward him, and Light quickly jumps to the side to dodge the attack. However, his approach is dangerous, prompting Isla to warn him that his sword god skill doesn't enhance his defense. If he takes even a single hit, it could be fatal. Despite the risk of death, Light remains determined not to back down. He's resolved to become the world's greatest adventurer, and if he's serious about achieving that dream, he knows he must conquer this challenge. He has finally gotten used to his body's new strength, so Light jumps into the air. As the ogre tries to strike him, he slashes its mace in half. No matter what it takes, he will make sure he catches up to Lena so the two of them can be together again. In one swift motion, he brings his sword down and cuts the ogre cleanly in half, all while Jean and his friends watch from a nearby hill. A short time later, Light heads back to the guild to trade his items for money. The receptionist, however, finds it difficult to believe that he managed to take down an ogre on his own. To prove it, Light presents the ogre horn he brought back, and to back him up, Jean's friends confirm that they witnessed the entire fight and can vouch for him. Convinced by their testimony, the receptionist accepts his story and asks him to wait a moment while she retrieves his reward. Meanwhile, Jean's friends thank Light once again for saving them. At that moment, a crowd begins to gather near the front of the guild, prompting Light to ask if something has happened. Jean explains that the S-rank party has just returned. This is the very same S-rank party that Lena joined, and it's the first time Light has seen her in the past 3 months. Light approaches her and tries to greet her, but to his shock, Lena responds by saying, "I've never met this man before in my life." Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.